Hello, good morning. Welcome to the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Now today I'm at the Pudu fish market. This is a great place to get all your aquarium stuff and lots of interesting exotic animals as well. And frankly, I'm not really in the business of buying any new pets. I'm just trying to maintain my aquarium. So here I am at the Puru fish market. But before I go shopping, I decided to talk to you for a little bit. So Puru market in Kuala Lumpur is the place you want to go if you want to get fruit, vegetables, meat, fish at a reasonable price. It's the most proletarian place you can possibly go in Kuala Lumpur. And frankly, it's one of the only few places in this capitalist shithole worth visiting. Yes, you stay away from the shopping malls. They don't need your business. If you must support anyone, try to support our hardworking local petite bourgeoisie. Okay? So, first of all, before we start today's video, I want to say thank you very much for the 34th birthday wishes. You know, I'm afraid to say that I have not yet replied individually to all of you. But I want to say I appreciate you wishing me on my birthday, my 34th birthday. So thank you very much. Now, I'm just doing a bit of morning market shopping and to see if I can get some fish and some ingredients for my mum to cook with. I just want to make it very clear to anyone watching this video who lives abroad, who thinks Malaysia is some dangerous backwater country, that Malaysia is actually a pretty damn safe country. It's one of the safest in Southeast Asia, in fact. Now, the fact of the matter is that we might be a little bit rustic. We might not be very, how do we say, cosmopolitan. We might not fit your American New York sensibilities. But, nevertheless, Malaysia is, by and large, a safe place. So, the fact of the matter is that it wasn't always this way. Puru, you see, used to be a hotbed of gangsterism and illegal activity. To a certain extent it still is, but it wasn't as bad as in the bad old days during colonial times. So despite the fact that Pudu has always had a reputation as one of the more questionable neighborhoods in Kuala Lumpur, it's still relatively safe. It's safer, of course, than a place in, say, downtown New York. I dare say I can walk around Pudu more safely than I can in downtown New York. So, despite all the pearl-clutching of Malaysian liberals who keep going on about how, Malaysia is a dangerous place, Malaysia is a lawless and savage place, I don't quite agree. I think that, a lot of liberals will take isolated incidents that happen in Malaysia and hype them up to make them seem like they represent all of Malaysia. So if you don't believe me, come to Malaysia yourself. It's a goddamn bloody safe place, okay? It's safer than America, that's for sure. Now behind me, if you see this pointy building over there, is the famous KL Tower, the famous Kuala Lumpur Tower. I do have one question though. Why is capitalist architecture so bloody ugly? Yes, you'd think that the bourgeoisie, with all their money and resources extracted from the sweat, blood and tears of the proletariat, would be able to design buildings that looked a bit more aesthetically pleasing to the eye as opposed to that giant dildo. But as it turns out, it shows you that money and good taste are sometimes, not always, in tandem. Sometimes money, having all the resources to build whatever you want, does not mean that you will manage the forces of production properly. You know, they could have built a library, but instead they had to build that giant dildo over there, you see. Oh, disgraceful. The bourgeoisie have truly squandered our wealth on pointless pursuits. But yeah, aside from the fact that Pudu is kind of a rough and tumble neighborhood with really abhorrent traffic, it's by and large a safe and civilized place. It is a safe and civilized business district for the most part. But it wasn't always the case in the old days. In the bad old days, Pudu was actually one of the most infamous ghettos and one of the places where, you could walk in and leave with your head cut off, basically. I'm just being hyperbolic, but you get the point. So what I'm trying to show you is that society is not static. Society evolves, society is evolving, and society will continue to evolve until the end of time. Just like the human condition in that same light is not static. If we talk in terms of individual people, you are not the same person you were at 10 years old as you were at 20 years old. And when you're 30 years old, you're not the same as a 20-year-old freshman university student, are you? So the point I'm trying to make is that nothing remains static and everything is in continuous motion, including the evolution of humans and society. So very much like how society evolves with changing material conditions, places, countries, and even neighborhoods become more civilized when their material conditions improve, so do people. But what I want to say is that there's no way you can define groups like races or ethnicities by any particular trait, because these traits of any said group evolves throughout the millennia. Racial supremacists believe that there are inherent God-given traits in certain races that make them superior to other races. For example, white supremacists believe that European people are superior to non-European people because European countries, on average, have more wealth at their disposal compared to non-European countries. So they believe that Europeans are therefore genetically superior. Not of course due to the fact that European countries were far more brutal in their colonization than non-European countries, but the point is, racial supremacists believe that there are certain inherent God-given characteristics in individual races which make them superior. The Prime Minister of Singapore, the late Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, was also a racial supremacist. Lee Kuan Yew himself believed that the Indians and the Chinese were superior to the Malays. That's what he believed. And I will quote what he said. "There are deep and abiding differences between groups. And whatever we do, we must remember that in Singapore, the Malays feel they are being asked to compete unfairly, that they are not ready for the competition against the Chinese and the Indians and the Eurasians. They will not admit, or they cannot admit to themselves that in fact, as a result of history, they are a different gene pool and they do not have these qualities that can enable them to enter the same race." I think what Prime Minister Lee was omitting was that the Malays and the Indians and the Chinese, they developed differently according to their own material conditions. He, being a eugenicist from the early 20th century, who studied in Cambridge, wanted to chalk it down to mere genetic difference, which was the mainstream British line in that time. But the reality is that the three races evolved separately with vastly different material conditions. And had the shoe been on the other foot, had the dynamics or the metrics been shifted in any other way, well, we could not have had this particular situation. If you notice, the vast majority of people in Kuala Lumpur, the heart of Kuala Lumpur, are Chinese. If you go to the CBD regions of Kuala Lumpur, the vast majority of people happen to be Chinese. And there's a reason for it. There are historical reasons for this fact. Because during colonial times, the Chinese were fundamentally what you would describe as being the middleman minority. Basically the minority that goes between the British and the other groups in the country. So, the fact of the matter is that the Chinese, after China had been ravaged during the Opium War, came to Southeast Asia for better, greener pastures. I am a Peranakan, so my historical trajectory is a little bit different. I'd been here for hundreds of years, but I'm talking about the late arrival Chinese, like the Hainanese, the Hokkiens, the Hakkas, the Teochews, the Cantonese. So you will see quite a number of Chinese neighborhoods in Kuala Lumpur. Puru is a very, very, very famous Chinese district where you can get really good Chinese food. But the point is, the fact is that while the Chinese were located in the central business districts, because that was where the jobs were, that was where the tin mines were, and where the manual labor was required, the Indians were kept by and large in the rubber plantations because they were brought over by the British to tap rubber. While the Chinese and the Indians were thrust into capitalism, the Malays were kept in the fields. They were basically serfs, kept as, as feudal servants of the Sultan. So the three races evolved separately with vastly different life experiences. And that is why, after colonization, the leadership put in these affirmative action policies. Because one race, compared to the other two, had very little experience with capitalism. One group had 50 years of a disadvantage, or I should say two other groups, the Chinese and the Indians, had a 50-year head start to the Malays when it came to capitalism, because the Chinese and the Indians experienced capitalism first. And this is the reason why affirmative action policies were placed in the first place. It was not done out of any malice to punish the non-Malays. It's a very idealistic, liberal take to try and chalk that up to racism against the nons, trying to keep the nons down. But the leadership, the post-colonial leadership who took over, were very, very concerned, you see, that the Malays, they were concerned, would be left behind, would drown under capitalism. Because in 1957, they were thrust from feudalism straight to capitalism, while the Chinese and the Indians had already had a head start ahead of them, more than 50 years of a head start. So no, despite the fact that you see differences in groups at this point in time in material conditions, or you see differences in groups when income and wealth is concerned, you can't say it's because of the fact that one group is simply superior to another group. One group has a better culture or a better genetic material, so to speak. Because it all boils down to your material conditions, really. You are only as good as your material conditions allow you to be. You see, imagine you have three fellows who have been trained in their individual sport. One fellow has been trained in Thai boxing, the other has been trained in golf, and the other has been trained in tennis. Now, all three of them enter a golfing competition. Who do you think is going to emerge the winner in this golfing competition? even though the other guy might be very good at Thai boxing, another guy might be very good at tennis, they would get trashed by the guy who's been trained in golf. Am I correct? So basically what affirmative action does is it simply eases up the handicap. It lowers the handicap, if I'm using the term correctly, to make it easier for other groups to pass. It starts out with noble intentions, and then it starts hurting people from the group that does not receive it. Not the rich people, but poor non-Malays start getting hurt when they get denied places at public universities and they start getting denied scholarships. That's where the resentment occurs. Well, this is slightly of a different topic, but yeah, if you ask me, affirmative action should be class-based and not race-based. If we were to have affirmative action in terms of class, like there was, for example, a certain quota that was required of working class students of any particular race, I would support that. That would be praxis. But no, racial affirmative action basically means you punish poor people who are not of a particular race, and you give a handicap to rich people of a certain race, even though they don't need it. But I'm not saying that there aren't many poor people in the majority race. That's not my point. So no, while I don't support racial affirmative action in Malaysia, that does not mean that I will tolerate people talking down about my fellow Malaysians or talking about Southeast Asians in a derogatory way either. Because I've seen far too many Asian activists, especially on places like AZN Identity or on places like Eastern Sun Reddit, who feel perfectly comfortable talking down to Southeast Asians. Now these people call themselves Asian activists, people on these American forums, but very soon you realize that when they say Asian, they only mean East Asians. They don't mean Malays, Indonesians, or Thais, or Cambodians. And very soon, when Southeast Asians bring up concerns that they have about colorism or East Asian discrimination against Southeast Asians, which does happen, let's not pretend it doesn't, these people are very quick to say, oh, but look at how they treat the Chinese in Malaysia. Oh, look at how racist they are. They're not nice to the Chinese in Malaysia. And I really, really detest hearing foreigners, especially people like Caleb Moppin, who said 2 years ago that he felt sorry for me because I'm a Chinese living in Malaysia, even though I'm perfectly happy as a Chinese living in Malaysia. Okay, I would rather live in Malaysia than I would in your shithole country, America, anyway. Because Malaysia may not be perfect, but Malaysia at least has revolutionary potential. You see, we have abolished the mandatory death penalty, unlike Singapore. We have made more progress in that regard compared to Singapore, which is absolutely cruel, cold and callous in the way it deals with the death penalty. Malaysia will get socialism first, before Singapore does. We only need to wake up the Malaysian people, to show them the shape of society, so that they can tear it down with their bare hands. But I really despise how foreigners, especially people in the West who do not like Southeast Asians, try to use the Chinese as their bulwark against the Malays or against any other Southeast Asian, just because they don't like Southeast Asians. Listen, the Chinese in Southeast Asia are not your pawns, yeah? We have far more in common when class interests are concerned with our fellow Malaysians, that includes the Malays, than we do with you in America. I consider myself closer to an average Malay than I do with a Chinese American. That's not to insult the Chinese Americans, it's just that culturally, spiritually, ethically, I'm far closer to an average Malay person than I am to a Chinese American. So I don't appreciate how many so-called Asian American activists will talk as if they support Asian emancipation from Western dominance, from white supremacy. But then they always treat the Southeast Asian at best as the second fiddle, and at worst as the embarrassing blot that they have to put up with. I believe it was Ali Wong, an American comedian, who described the Southeast Asian as the so-called, if you'll pardon my extremely vulgar terminology, she described the Southeast Asian as being the jungle Asian. Does this look like a jungle to you? Does Southeast Asia look like a jungle to you? The fact of the matter is that while Southeast Asia has not progressed as much as East Asia, as much as Singapore has, it has nothing to do at all with the so-called inferiority of Southeast Asian people, but rather with the superiority of Western brutality in creating the material conditions that we endure in the first place. And it also has to do with the fact that there are no poor countries in the world. There are only overexploited countries. And if you're wondering why Singapore is much more prosperous than Malaysia, well, because Singapore is much closer in proximity to the West than we are. Singapore is a much better bootlicker than we are. Singapore is fundamentally a Western dog. Philippines also, to a certain extent, is a Western dog. But Philippines is treated like the mongrel, while Singapore is treated like the prized possession, the Pudu of Asia, so to speak. Because race supremacists in the West and in the East, people like Lee Kuan Yew, will say, oh, Singapore is more successful than Malaysia, it's more developed than Malaysia. Oh, because it's majority Chinese. Well, the fact of the matter, no, it's more developed and successful than Malaysia because your leaders are colonial stooges. Lee Kuan Yew himself was a colonial stooge. Okay, he never wanted to decolonize. He only adopted the anti-colonial line when it became apparent that the British had no choice but to leave. But it was actually, he was actually reporting directly to the British. Okay, so your country, even today, is a nation of colonial stooges. Just look at how you slobber over Israel and how friendly you guys are with the imperialist powers of the West. Say what you want about our Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister has many flaws, but being a colonial stooge is not one of them. Okay? The fact of the matter is that Singapore and Malaysia developed differently, also because of different material conditions. Singapore is a puppet, it is a vassal state of the Western imperialist powers. And not only that, Singapore itself has its tentacles in Malaysia. It is one of the biggest investors of finance capital in our country. Yes, we are a global South country. You are a global North country. And that is because of your proximity to Western capital. Yes, that is the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. It is not a story of some underdog who was cast out of Malaysia and then forced to lead his country into success. No, it's a country of colonial stooges, and your country is basically a country of colonial stooges that are basically friendly to the Western imperialist interests. My country might be poorer than yours. My country might be less affluent and less classy than yours. But we have dignity. We do not sell ourselves out for a bowl of rice, unlike you people, okay? And there's no reason to believe that affluent countries like Japan and Singapore will forever be affluent. America in the 1950s believed that things would go on as they were forever, didn't they? They believed that they would continue to live the white picket fence lifestyle forever. But when the global South started fighting back, against America, and they started taking back what was rightfully theirs, Americans soon realized that the white picket fence lifestyle of their grandparents was merely a dream. And it is only a dream now because Americans are no longer extracting, or they're no longer allowed to keep their boot heel on the throat of the global south. The global south is now fighting back. And that's why you guys have noticed your material conditions getting worse. The same can go for affluent global north countries like Japan and Singapore. You enjoy your conditions right now because you enjoy the good graces of the Western imperialist powers. But under socialism, who knows that your fortunes may change, right? So I'm not condemning the working class of these countries, but I am saying that just because a country is affluent and wealthy today, it does not mean anything tomorrow. And just because a country was poor yesterday, it does not mean anything tomorrow either. Many people like to think of Southeast Asia as the lower class sort of Asian, right? Because Southeast Asia is poorer on average than East Asia. And Southeast Asia is seen as the culturally backward Asian for this reason. No one seems to care about Southeast Asian civilization. But that's only because of the material conditions. Because China, during the century of humiliation, was far poorer than any Southeast Asian country today. Yes, during the China's century of humiliation, nobody considered China to be an epicenter of civilization. Perhaps Southeast Asia is enduring its century of humiliation right now. Who knows? But that doesn't mean that Southeast Asians should think that the conditions of their countries will remain ever the same forever. You know, just like a man is not the same at 10 and 20 as he is at 30 and 40, a country will not be the same every 50 to 60 years. It may be a slow slog on the way to socialism, but we will get there. We will get there. And when it comes to the global north countries in Asia, I'm talking about countries like Singapore, which should be a global south because they are geographically located in the global south. You people have a choice in this new world. You can either decouple from the Western imperialist powers, join up the global south, and stand together with us in our liberation, or you can sink together with your colonial masters. That's really up to you, yeah? The point is, I do not tolerate anyone disrespecting Southeast Asia, despite the fact that I'm racially not Southeast Asian. But, well, I guess you could say I'm partly Southeast Asian, being a Peranakan. But you are mistaken in thinking that I'm going to play along, I'm going to go along with you just because you try sucking up to the Chinese in Malaysia or Indonesia as the so-called model minority. I'm not going to go along with you. Yeah? I know that you're trying to create destabilization in our region. You're trying to create friction between the races. But I'm not buying this. Okay? As I've said, my interest is in improving my country as a society, not in trying to play this culture war game and basically throwing the Malaysian workers under the bus just because they're not Chinese. I'm not a reactionary. But yeah, I just wanted to end this video by saying that if people have more money and resources than others, that does not mean that they are inherently superior people. For example, if you are studying in Harvard or Yale, yes, you might be a smart person, but that doesn't make you a better person than someone who didn't go to university and never had the opportunity to go to university because their mommy and daddy could not pay their tuition fees, you see. If you are a rich country, a developed country, that does not in any way, shape or form make you a superior country intellectually, spiritually or morally. I don't think. It merely means that you are on the receiving end of privilege, and the poor and the downtrodden and the underdeveloped countries are on the receiving end of exploitation. As Michael Parenti said, there is no such thing as a poor country. There are only overexploited countries. If Malaya were a poor region, the British never would have come here in the first place, because you don't go to poor places to make money, yeah? So, I repeat, a person's material conditions determines their state of being. A person may be rich today and poor tomorrow, or poor today and rich tomorrow. But last but not least, no way should one think that just because you come from a developed country, that the people in your country are in any way superior to the people in a non-developed country. Okay? Alright, thank you. Have a nice day.